Hello and welcome to offshore circuit powerboat racing. This week we're at Shanklin on the Isle of Wight for the fourth round of this popular series. Shanklin lies on the eastern side of the island where the normally sheltered bays offer perfect racing conditions for the fast circuit boats. With a large helping of enthusiasm and excellent facilities, courtesy of an enterprising council, Shanklin provides a perfect backdrop for championship racing. Not that Shanklin is all modern. The old village has remained virtually unchanged through the centuries. It was here the Powerboat Festival began, with a parade of competitors creating a carnival-like atmosphere. Soon the carnival was over, and as the competitors made their way back, there were already signs of a dramatic day ahead. The northeasterly wind had picked up on the incoming tide, and it was going to be a bumpy ride. Now, safety was foremost in their minds as the final minutes before the race ticked away. Bob Baker, last year's championship runner-up, knows all about safety. He crashed in the previous round at Pwllheli.
We were virtually neck and neck with Nick Darsh, having been that way for just about the whole race. And the next thing that happened was that I hit a brick wall. That's all I knew about it. In detail, it was a three-wave trip, up on the first one, tripped on the second, and then straight in like a dart. And that at 70 miles an hour is fairly uncomfortable, I can promise you.
And what is the first thing that you know?
Pain. The water hit from there upwards, and it really was just a very, very severe jolt. And when it's that bad, and that's the first that you've known about it, you know that you're swimming, because the boat would not come out of that.
So you were actually thrown out of the boat, or did you stay in?
I was thrown onto the rear portion of the boat through my navigator's seat, which actually broke. And as I came up to my senses as such, the boat was already levelling and falling down backwards.
A lucky escape indeed. So why do they do it every week? I asked Martin Bull, 1991 C-Class champion.
Well, for someone who hates the sea and had never been in a powerboat before, I can only put it down to the exhilaration and the adrenaline. Before every race, I'm feeling rotten, but once that start flag goes down, it's superb. The adrenaline just takes over and you're off. It's absolutely exhilarating, that's all I can say. I enjoy it. It's a sport that has really bitten me. Unfortunately, it's costly as well, and that hurts too, but thoroughly enjoy it. And the crowd are superb. Everyone that races helps everyone else. We all help together. If something goes wrong, everyone's there. It's a great atmosphere.
And that camaraderie was soon evident as the crews manoeuvred their boats prior to launching. It was time too for last-minute adjustments, time to connect at the intercom, time to complete the final countdown, and time to select the correct prop that might bring victory. A man who is always prepared is Nick Barsh, 5-time winner of the National A-Class Championship. I asked him what he feared most about racing in the worsening conditions.
Probably because it's easterly, the big holes appear from nowhere. You tend to get set up on a leg and you think you've got the thing set right, and out of nowhere a big hole will appear beneath you, and the wind being as strong as it is, if the nose goes up at all, the wind gets under the boat and you have what's known as a trip, which is a classic thing. The nose goes up, the back of the engine catches the wave beneath you, and the nose disappears in the hole ahead of you, and you're gone.
And it was that very disaster that struck Bob Baker 2 weeks before. No one knew what was going through his mind as he made his way to the start line, but they must have been anxious moments. A large crowd had gathered and they eagerly awaited the start. One final check from the officer of the day, the course was clear, he gave the signal and the rolling start was underway. The boats accelerated rapidly up to 70 miles per hour, dividing themselves into two groups as they battled for position. As both groups converged on the first mark, it was clear there was going to be little room for error. Bob Baker had decided the safest place was to be out front and away from trouble. He was last to decelerate and got to the mark first. As they passed the mark, however, he and the following pack were to get a taste of the conditions they would have to endure for the next 10 laps. They came face to face with the easterly swells. Suddenly, Baker's decision looked a good one. Much of the opposition was driving blind, trapped in the spray thrown up by the boats in front.
My goodness me, we saw the complete inside of the boat. Here's a man who's making things quietly, and this could be the right way. That's Steve Harris, and that.
Baker by now was clear, seemingly unperturbed by the proceedings 2 weeks before. He had lost ground in the championship hunt and was clearly in the mood to do something about it. Behind him, the pack were beginning to shape up. Clearly, battle was about to commence.
But it's still at the back then, A12, Steve Harris and Ian Atley making it very hot.
But at the end of the first lap, it was still Baker who led. He had averaged over 60 miles per hour for the first 4 miles, and the boat was handling perfectly. His adrenaline was flowing, and any lingering memories of his accident had been surely wiped away by now. 11 seconds behind, Ian Blacker had moved into second position. The 18-year-old newcomer from Reading is getting a reputation for fearless driving, and today was no exception. But he'd taken the mark rather wide, and champion Nick Barsh, who at one point was fifth, seized the opportunity and attempted to pass on the inside. But Barsh got it all wrong and allowed the youngster off the hook again. Meanwhile, Martin Bull in a 1300 C-class powered boat was fourth overall, ahead of the 1800cc boats and most of the 2 litres. First of those 1800cc's was Gary Archer, making one of his infrequent appearances these days. He was just ahead of last year's champion Dave Wilcock, also in B-class, driving Interlink Express. He's having a wretched season with mechanical problems. And once again, it's a champion who tries to pass on the inside and fails. This time, the experience of Archer proves just too much. In C-class, number 59 holds on to second place with little hope of catching class leader Martin Bull. He's in tremendous form, and the little boat is no match for the big waves.
So it's A14.
At the end of lap 2 in A-class, there was a new leader. The infight between Blacker and Barsh had hotted up. Blacker had passed Baker with some ease and taken Barsh with him. But Barsh, who had wasted his opportunity to take the lead on first lap, edged up on the inside and waited to pounce. The response from Blacker was immediate. He put his foot down and took the mark at almost full speed. But once again, he was rather wide and left the door open, inviting the champion to come through. Behind them, Baker, still confident, held on, just 3 seconds down. It was a good tight turn from Barsh, and he looked odds-on to take the lead. But again, he was outwitted by the younger man, who cut in, fired a broadside and slowed the champion down as he was about to go through. It was brilliant and aggressive driving from Blacker, who accelerated triumphantly into the third lap, knowing he had the master on the run.
He had something for the future and pulled out something like a 50 to 75-yard lead.
In C-class, Martin Bull and Chris Yeo were still making a mockery of the form book. They were still ahead of the bigger B-class boats and looked in very good form indeed. Behind them, Dave Wilcock had passed Gary Archer to lead in B-class and was now determined to get ahead of the smaller boat. But it wasn't going to be easy. The swell was increasing, and it was as much as he could do to keep the boat upright. In second place in B-class, Brian Healy and John Veers were losing ground on the leader. But nevertheless, they were some way ahead of current championship leader Dave Yeoman, and that would give them valuable championship points. In second position in C, Ian Sanderson and Paul Scott were driving the smallest boat in the race, just 15 feet long. This was tough going for the crew as they turned the mark. Each wave produced a spine-jarring takeoff and landing. And in their wake, the rest of the fleet fared no better as they tried to get back on terms. By lap 8, conditions, if anything, were still getting worse. It was now simply a matter of survival. Not that the leaders seemed to notice. A relieved Dave Wilcock had finally passed Martin Bull. It didn't increase his championship points, but it would certainly spare him a few post-race blushes. 200 yards behind in A-class and about to lap everybody, Blacker was still showing scant regard for Barsh's reputation. And although the champion had the edge on the flatter parts of the course, Blacker was fearless in the rough. Every ace Barsh produced was trumped in style. With less than 2 laps to go, it looked as if a certain crowd was about to topple. In Sterling, meanwhile, 4th in A-class, was probably considering that No Problem wasn't the most appropriate title he could have chosen for his boat. This was heavy going, but at least he was still in the points. And he was soon to increase those points, because up ahead, as the leaders approached the start of the final lap, a drama was about to unfurl. Blacker was still in front, but as they rounded the mark, he slowed dramatically. He pulled across the stern of Barsh's boat, and he was clearly in trouble. Barsh took the lead, unaware that the battery had been wrenched from its clamps in Blacker's boat, forcing him out of the race. It was a cruel twist and wretched luck for Blacker, who in his first full season had come as close as anyone to ending Barsh's supremacy. But in the end, it was Barsh's boat that withstood the test in the battering seas, and it was he who took the checkered flag. Bob Baker's second position meant he would keep in touch in the championship table. As expected, Dave Wilcock won B-class. His challenge to retain the title was back on course. Martin Bull had slowed considerably, but still won C-class comfortably. In the end, it was Nick Barsh who seemed the more relieved.
It was just a war of attrition, I think, was the correct word, and I was hoping that he was going to make a mistake or break down, which eventually he did. I mean, these conditions, you really have to pace yourself, and not only for today, but there's another race tomorrow, so keeping the boat in one piece is very important, and a second and being in one piece is probably better than a win and no race tomorrow.
Because he stayed with you and you stayed with him, neither would give way. Did it ever cross your mind that perhaps you might ease back and live to fight another day?
No, never even entered my head. I mean, I don't think I would race if I was of that makeup. I'd never give up.
And if it was Barsh who looked delighted, it was Blacker who looked disappointed, but far from dejected.
I felt I had the faster boat down the back in the rougher water. It used to catch me a bit in the flatter water down the front, and I was sort of trying to open up as big a lead as I could down the back and hold him off on the flat.
You tell us, because many people, when they get overtaken by a champion, settle for second, but you came back at him continually. You know, do you really believe you can beat this man?
Yeah, I do. Someone's got to do it. Someone will do it. I believe it could be me.
Martin Bull, meanwhile, was counting the cost of flirting with the lead in the bigger boats.
Basically, we were having a good race. I mean, it's not often that the 1300 cc's are out there in front, but we were beating the 1800 cc's, and we were up there with the 2 litres. And halfway through the race, we felt the engine die a little bit, steering went a bit funny, and something was obviously wrong, so we decided just to take it easy and plod round. At least we'd win our class and get the points. What we didn't realise is this had happened when we got back, so we shan't be racing tomorrow. But hopefully we'll get it welded up and all back for next week's race and be out there again.
And so it was Nick Barsh and Steve Kent who accepted the warm applause on the winner's rostrum. But as they popped the cork on the champagne and tasted the sweetness of success, they knew that in the 5 years they had been champions, few had pushed them so close. Here then, the results of the 4th round. bustling harbour of Bridlington has retained much of its character through the centuries. Built in 1173, it has sheltered a flourishing fishing industry, or slippery trade as it's called here. And 29 boats still trawl the North Sea in search of cod to satisfy the demand for the East Coast's renowned fish and chips. It's a colourful resort, award-winning blue flags and golden sands, the white cliffs of Flamborough Head and the green rolling wolds beyond. The resort is also characterised by a wide range of attractions and entertainments, making it ever popular for family holidays. But it's Bridlington's newfound association with water sports that brought us here for the 7th round of the Offshore Circuit Racing Powerboat Championships. Things got underway with a parade rather than a race, although the theme was certainly very appropriate. Offshore circuit racing represents the smallest of all powerboat racing categories and forms a combination of the seamanship involved in offshore racing and the multi-lap infighting normally associated with inshore circuit racing. OCR, as it's commonly called, is divided into 3 classes. Production Class A is up to 2,000 cc. This includes the Mercury XR2 and a minimum boat length of 18 feet. Production Class B is up to 1,800 cc. Normal engines being the Yamaha 140 or the Mercury 115. Minimum boat length 16 feet. Production Class C is up to 1,300 cc, and engines in this class are either the Yamaha 90 or the Suzuki 85. Hulls must be standard production models of the ski boat type. They must comply with the rules and have a minimum production of 20 and be freely available to the general public. Safety rules are strict. Helmets, life jackets, jack plugs and flares are all compulsory. Each boat is scrutinised thoroughly before being allowed to race. The engines, like the hulls, are completely standard, although the propeller is a free choice. So most crews spend many hours practicing before selecting what they hope will be a winning combination. Good preparation and choice of props has made one man dominant in A-class for some time.
Nick Bosch, 5 times national champion. It must be getting harder to keep in front.
It's getting harder, yes. I mean, but of course, as you know, there's production boats and engines, so we don't have an edge on that anymore. And the standard of driving is getting so good now. This is why it's so competitive, and that's the beauty of it. So it is getting hard.
What does a champion do to keep the advantage?
It's a very good question. You just have to keep working out the little detail things. Propellers are free, of course. You can play with propellers. And I think today it's going to be all about propellers. The conditions are in between. I'm not familiar with the area, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen when the tide starts to run in. But I think we'll find ourselves on some legs wishing we had a different propeller to the one we actually got. So I think it's Hobson's choice today, and whoever chooses the right prop is going to have the edge.
But someone with a different propeller problem this weekend was Bob Baker of Dixon Scientific.
We arrived at 10 o'clock, hoping to just get kitted out prior to briefing. Opened up the back of the boat, and the propellers that we had in there last night were unfortunately nowhere to be seen. What to do?
And those propellers are important, of course. Do you carry spares?
They are very important. The spares were they, unfortunately. The others are at home this weekend. We only brought the 2 up, thinking that conditions would be suitable for them. However, very kindly, one of the other guys here has a spare propeller, and we've borrowed that for this weekend.
Now, you're 3rd in the championship at the moment. How's that going to affect your chances?
Well, we hope very little. It's a very similar propeller to the one that I lost, and the gentleman that lent it to me is actually lying 2nd, so I will endeavour to show him that his propeller is good.
Another young pretender of A-class is 23 years old Ian Blacker from Reading, who has been close to deposing the champion.
Because the man you're trying to beat is Nick Bosch, and he's very quick in the flat. Do you prefer rough conditions?
Well, I quite like all conditions really, but we seem to have the edge a little bit on the rough, so obviously the rough is going to be better for us.
In B-class, Dave Yeoman, driving a 19-foot Argo powered by a 140 horsepower Yamaha, has a 14-point lead. But with 14 points for the winner today, some had ideas about changing that.
Mark Greenaway, 2nd in the championship, but without a win. What are you going to do about it?
Well, hopefully we're going to go out there and win today. We finally got the boat running the way it should be. It's taken us a while. It's quite late into the season. But there's still enough races left for us to pull back and hopefully win the championship. But we'll find out today. It's our sort of conditions out there, and we're just going to go flat out and hopefully win today.
In C-Class, Martin Bull in the Yamaha-powered Phantom is 19 points ahead, but today sees the return of a former champion. Doug Kerr won the championship in 88 and 89, but has struggled since coming to grief in the Mersey.
Can you tell us about those accidents?
The accident, we hit a large plank of wood in the river, and the boat starts to suffer from cavitation. The cavitations on the bend caused me to lose the steering and hit the buoy really hard, subsequently hurting the co-driver. But the boat's never really got performed since then, but we think we've got it sorted out now, so let's see how things go today.
As the final preparations were made, the black clouds rolling off the wold sent shivers down the spines of most crews. It was certainly flat here, but further out it was getting very rough. It was all good news for the big crowd, most of whom had lined the harbour wall, although some, it appeared, preferred a more revolutionary grandstand. The course for the day was 15 3-mile laps, with a chicane near the beach to test the driver's skill and entertain the crowd. Then, right on time, the 20 boats competing in 3 different classes crossed the start line on the flat section of the course. The speeds quickly built up to 70 miles per hour. Champions Nick Barsh and Steve Kent in the red and white Samsung cameras were boxed in by the spray and wash of other boats, enabling Ian and Andrew Backer to get in front, but not for long. After a matter of seconds, their engine seized and their challenge evaporated, leaving Steve Harris in Scorpion Properties and Bob Baker in Dixon Scientific to lead the charge into the first lap. When they turned, the crews were to get a first taste of conditions they could expect for the next 50 miles or so, as the sea transformed into a foaming cauldron. At Mark 3 on lap 1, Steve Harris was a surprise leader in A-Class, but as he and the rest of the fleet turned, they hit the rolling swells of the North Sea, whipped up by a northwesterly wind. Each wave was like a ski ramp, tossing the boats into the air like corks. In B-Class, Mark Greenaway's bid for the lead in the table got off to a poor start. The yellow Phantom B20 appeared to be going well, but Dave Wilcock in B6 had already gone through. Bob Baker in the blue Phantom, Dixon Scientific, borrow prop or not, was showing an amazing turn of speed as he powered past Adam Butters in A78 Ebony. Baker has been runner-up in the championship for the last 3 years, and in any lesser company than Nick Barsh would surely have been champion. But you can't keep a good man down, and as they approached the chicane at the end of the first lap, it was Barsh who had come through the rough on top. The 18-foot Phantom, powered by an XR2 Mercury outboard, is perfectly balanced, and Barsh was demonstrating how to extract the maximum. But Baker was on his tail, pushing the champion all the way. On that borrowed prop, he was only 3 seconds behind, and by now, Barsh knew there was only one way to win, and that was going to be the hard way. Behind them in A-Class on lap 2, things were even closer. Robert McCarthy and Chris Lewis in Pacific Alliance, 3 seconds behind on lap 1, were now just 2 seconds ahead of A78 Ebony, Alan and Paul Butters. With Stan Dorian, number 98, 6 seconds adrift, but catching. By the halfway point, it really was developing into quite a battle, and there was all still to race for in A-Class. Barsh was still in front, but only by 8 seconds, with Baker still hanging on. Pete Bown in Mersey Mouse Tours had moved up to 6, passing early leader Steve Harris on the way. In B-Class, leaders Dave Wilcock and Adrian Shepherd were showing why they were champions in 1991, while Mark Greenaway, now only 6 seconds down, was still searching for that first win of the season. In C-Class, Martin Bull and Chris Yeo, number 51, were teaching the old champion Doug Kerr a few new tricks. But Kerr wasn't tempted. He stayed patiently behind and waited. With just 2 laps to go, very little had changed. The water certainly hadn't got any calmer, and few crews had given up hopes of victory. In A-Class, they were all still chasing the champion, Nick Barsh and Steve Kent in Samsung cars. Utterly brilliant in their execution, they had spurned the advances of the pursuing pack and looked odds-on for a 6th win of the season. In B-Class, Dave Wilcock and Adrian Shepherd in B6 Interlink were continuing a good run. 2 victories in the last 2 races prior to this one had put them right back in contention, and they were stepping up the pace. In C-Class, Doug Kerr and daughter Sue still hadn't found a way past leaders Martin Bull and Chris Yeo in C51. Bull's 4 victories so far this season has put him in the driving seat. One more would virtually seal a championship victory. But back at the front and heading into the last lap, it was a final opportunity for Bob Baker to record his first win of the year. He had repeatedly crept up on Nick Barsh in the rougher sections, only to find the champion responding with contemptuous ease and then pulling away again. But the thought of finishing second yet again was adrenalising Baker, and he prepared for a final assault, come what may. Meanwhile, who would finish third was still a matter of even money. Butters and McCarthy had swapped places 6 times thus far, and there were still only 3 seconds between them, with Butters holding the advantage at the inside line. But McCarthy, like Baker up ahead in second place, was in no mood to succumb. And although the bigger boat was in front, he went into the last lap at full throttle and held on for dear life. For Dave Wilcock in B6 Interlink Express, things were decidedly better. He was well clear and went on to win comfortably. Mark Greenaway in B20 was also close, but not that close. He had slipped to third, with husband and wife team Gary and Angela Archer filling second slot. Martin Bull duly clinched his 5th win of the season and moved on to 54 points, almost out of reach of the rest of C-Class. For Doug Kerr, it was a question of an improved performance, but more work seemed required before he's once again a serious challenge for the title. And for Ian Sanderson, it was a 3rd and valuable points that keep him 2nd overall this year. But back at the finish line, the amateurs and the experts alike awaited the outcome of Class A. Had Baker achieved the seemingly impossible, or had the champion reigned supreme? It didn't take long for that particular question to be answered, as the red and white Phantom streaked across the finish line at almost 80 miles an hour. Arms raised triumphantly, Barsh and Kent had done it again. 6 wins and 6 races in the year they will almost certainly win their 6th championship. And so, to the applause of an enthusiastic and approving Bridlington crowd, the champions took to the podium for their laurels. But as they celebrated, there was drama in the second event of the day. Graham Wood's air entrapment hull nearest the camera was to crash at great speed. Although conditions were ideal on the seafront, further out it was still rough, and it was here that Wood came to grief. The race was eventually won by Phil Greer in D50 Equalizer, but for Wood and his co-driver Chris Lewis, it was a lucky escape. As they came ashore, both crew appeared to have escaped serious injury. But Wood, seen here on the right, was subsequently admitted into intensive care after collapsing. The sight of the wrecked hull bore witness to the speed of the crash and served as a reminder that but for the efficiency of the safety and rescue network, the outcome could have been very different indeed. At least the crew was safe. But at the end of the day, the celebrations continued as Bridlington honoured its very first powerboat champions. And we'll be bringing you more action from the championships as the season reaches its climax. But for now, the results of the 7th round. Hello and welcome to offshore circuit powerboat racing. This week we're at the Cornwall Coliseum at Carlisle Bay near St Austell. We're here for the 7th round of this exciting championship. With 6 races gone and 7 to go, all the issues are still wide open in a series that's had more than its fair share of incidents so far. Points are never easy to obtain, particularly here in the unpredictable waters off the Cornish coast. And no one knows that better than Nick Barsh, 5 times national champion in A-class. Nick Barsh, just 1 victory away from your 6th national championship. How are you going to approach today's race?
Well, the same as I approach all of them, Peter. I shall do my very best. There's a lot of pressure today. Obviously, it's a home water for me, and of course all the other crews know that this is a crucial race as far as the A-class championship is, so I'm not expecting an easy race, especially with the forecast that we've had, and I see the winds now starting to pick up, so I think it could be quite interesting.
Well, Barsh seemed confident enough, but one young pretender had decided to throw caution to the wind.
You, like the rest, will have had to make a decision on props today. The conditions are worsening by the minute. What decision have you made?
Well, we've gone for our flatter water prop, not completely flat speed prop, but with flatter water, sort of average conditions. Not really rough. I don't think it's going to be that rough, that we need the real rough prop.
Is that not going to make it slightly dangerous for you in the rougher parts of the course? And how are you going to approach that?
Well, the boat will be a little bit of a handful when it's rough, but hopefully on the smooth we should have that little edge, and that's where we'll make the difference.
Have you taken this gamble knowing that it's going to be choppy and that you've probably got the edge on Nick Barsh in the rough? Did that influence you?
Well, we've probably got the edge on him in the rough because the boat maybe is set up a little bit better for the rough. Nick runs very well in the smooth, so we've got to take the gamble and get a bit more speed in the smooth water.
Bob Baker in Dixon Scientific is another challenger to Barsh's supremacy, although he was adopting a more cautious approach to propeller selection in view of the forecast. He explained his decision.
Can you explain to us why a chopper propeller might be more dangerous in rough conditions?
Well, Peter, they're a slightly larger bladed propeller, so they pick up more water as they enter and tend to throw the back of the boat about a bit, particularly if it is rough, and the waves are also throwing the boat around. So consequently, it makes the whole situation very much more unstable than this particular propeller, which enters very smoothly. It's that much smaller and hence doesn't have quite the same torque as the larger bladed chopper.
Does it change your attitude to the race because you desperately need the points? Will you be forced to be more aggressive at the start?
Well, certainly I will be going for it at the start because the acceleration from these propellers is very good, and also in the rougher parts of the course I will be going as hard as I can because that's where my advantage will lie.
And as Bob Baker left the shelter of land for the start, he knew there was a lot to do. 48 points behind Barsh with only 17 on the table here for the winner was asking a lot. But he, like the other crews, knew that to get any points at all, you first have to finish, as both Blacker and Barsh were to discover, as Carlisle Bay produced a strange twist to the championship. The start, however, provided few surprises. The familiar sight of 20 of Britain's top circuit racing crews powering towards the first turn mark at over 70 miles per hour is always a compelling one, and here was no exception. Bob Baker in the blue and gold Dixon Scientific hadn't quite got the flying start he'd predicted. One, he was under pressure from Ian Blacker in the white boat near Sacamra, but more importantly, Nick Barsh had got away to an even better start and had taken Alan Butters with him. By now, Barsh and Butters were almost 200 yards in front, with Barsh in the driving seat, when quite unexpectedly, Butters with the much heavier boat took the lead for almost the first time in the championship. But Barsh is used to all that and quickly reasserted his authority, manipulating the immaculately prepared Phantom monohull with the sort of ease that has become his hallmark. But Alan Butters, with brother Paul navigating, seemed determined to put what had been a pretty miserable season thus far behind them, and started a sequence of events that was to dramatically affect the outcome of the race. Meanwhile, Blacker, with his flamboyant driving, fearless attitude and fast propeller, was making a charge. First, he relegated Baker to 4th place, making Baker's choice of propeller seem somewhat doubtful. Then he caught up and claimed the scalp of Butters, as he moved swiftly into 2nd place. Behind, the rest of the fleet were almost line abreast, each hoping to start the second half of the championship on a winning note, and all enjoying conditions that weren't nearly as bad as predicted. In B class, last year's champion Dave Wilcock in Interlink Express B6 was finding improved form after a disastrous start to the season which left him without a point from the first 3 races. He had now recovered and was just 11 points behind Dave Yeoman in B7 Pink Panther. Here was his chance to get to within 1 point, but there was no question it was going to be easy. Back at the front, Barsh was still holding off Blacker's challenge, although at times he had looked vulnerable, particularly in the rough, as his young opponent from Reading had predicted. Blacker, with an experience that belies his short racing career, knows this is Barsh's weakness and sat intimidatingly behind, forcing Barsh's navigator Steve Kent to look frequently over his shoulder and report. But Barsh knew he could win the championship here and refused to be ruffled. He just kept his head down and held on. By the end of lap 2, however, Blacker's challenge was over. Engine seizure had left him just as a spectator. And it was a relieved Nick Barsh who must have thought the race was now in the bag, but little did he know. Behind, the battle for second was in full flow. Baker and then Butters taking the lead, and all the time pushing each other nearer and nearer towards Barsh. In C-Class, C18 Matthew Webb and co-driver Alan Cameron were in their first national after graduating from junior racing. It was an experience the youngsters wouldn't forget, and at this point they'd got up to 3rd place. In 4th position in A-Class, Robert McCarthy was showing some of the rough water capabilities of his new Carrera hull. McCarthy, who lies 4th in the championship, is consistently in the points, although with a heavier boat lacks the pace to keep him up with the leaders. In B-Class, nothing had changed. Dave Wilcock and Dave Yeoman were still locked head-to-head, and the lead had changed several times already, and it was likely to do so on several more occasions, as one and then the other seized the initiative. In C-Class, Martin Bull and Chris Yeo in C51 were looking to clock up their 6th victory of the season. They would then only require 1 more to record their 2nd successive championship title, and it was all looking just too easy. It was also looking easy for Nick Barsh, almost a mile in front, looking as he's done on so many occasions, totally invincible, and it looks odds on that Barsh will record his 7th victory of the season. A clean sweep that would give him his 6th successive championship title and a unique entry in the British record books. But also where a new challenge is about to emerge from Alan Butters in A78 Ebony. Having shrugged off the attentions of Bob Baker, Butters is the fastest man on the course in the deteriorating conditions. Not only has the wind picked up, but the driving rain has reduced the visibility dramatically. Bob Baker, A50, meanwhile, was not only suffering from the poor weather, he clearly had mechanical problems, surrendering his 3rd position to Rob McCarthy in Pacific Alliance, and is now under threat from Ian Sterling in number A15. And Ian Sterling, with co-driver Debbie Pofferman, was right behind. He's had a mixed season, with a 3rd at Shanklin on the Isle of Wight his best result. However, sheer consistency in a sport where mechanical breakdown is common has put him 5th in the table. McCarthy too is consistent. A 3rd in this race would equal his best results of the season at Porthwelly and Shanklin, and the former ski racer is always a good each-way bet for a place. In B-Class, Dave Wilcock, B6, was still having problems with championship leader Dave Yeoman, B7. For lap after lap, they arrived at the start-finish line together, and it was looking odds-on that the camera would have to decide the outcome. But behind them and about to lap the entire fleet, Barsh had emerged from the rain with a surprise companion. Unbelievably, Butters had caught him out and caught him up, and they started the last lap almost side by side, with Barsh just holding the advantage as once again they disappeared into the gloom. It was a long 4 minutes before the outcome was revealed. With the checkered flag held aloft, all eyes waited for the leaders to emerge for the final time from the storm. But this time, only one red and white boat appeared, and it wasn't Barsh. The number 78 meant that somehow Butters had got past him, but even more dramatically, Barsh wasn't even in sight. And so it was Butters who took the line honours and recorded his first win of the season. Right behind, a lap down, Dave Wilcock had finally got the better of Dave Yeoman and closed in on the championship leader. Martin Ball duly completed the route in C-class for the 6th time in the series and took his 2nd championship. B7, the tired Dave Yeoman eventually trailed in, but at least he'd served warning that he wouldn't be surrendering the lead that easily. 3rd in B-class were Mark Greenaway and Stuart Porter. 6 points here gave them a total of 51 and maintained their 3rd place in the table. For Ian Sanderson and Paul Scott, 50 miles in the smallest boat in British offshore racing and finishing 2nd is always a different experience, especially when you adopt a foot down and hope for the best philosophy. For Robert McCarthy, that 2nd position was a season's best, and a hope that the rest of the season might produce silver linings. Behind him, for the ailing Bob Baker, it was always going to be a tale of what might have been. However, a 3rd would keep him in 2nd, so to speak. But more importantly, as he crossed the line, Barsh still hadn't appeared. As everyone waited, it was clear that in the battle on the last lap with Butters, something had gone terribly wrong. And so it had. Rounding the final mark, Barsh had held the lead, but then suddenly Butters, under full power, had made contact with the stern of Barsh's boat, and in a split second rode over the top of the champion, leaving a trail of destruction. Only Barsh and co-driver Steve Kent knew how close they'd come to a major catastrophe.
Well, Nick Barsh, it wasn't quite the outcome you'd hoped for in the race. Can you tell us what happened?
We were on the last lap, we turned the last, we were on the last mark, finishing line in sight, having a very close race with Alan Butters. We'd taken the short line to the buoy, took it very tight. Alan had swept out wide, and he obviously had a lot more speed on than we did, and I think basically he went for a space that wasn't there, and the space he thought was there happened to be our boat. So you can see where it came over the top. It ran from the transom and knocked the engine out of the way, through the transom, through the dashboard, scratched Steve's helmet. I actually leaned back and watched it all go past.
What was the first thing that you knew? When did you know that the boat was going to make contact?
I had a feeling of impending doom when Steve shouted at me, and the next thing was the impact. And after that it came through. It seemed in slow motion, but I'm sure it wasn't. But I think when the adrenaline's pumping, everything does seem in slow motion, and I can see it vividly now. The whole of the spray rails and the skeg and the propeller going past.
What went through your mind?
I thought Steve had been hit. I knew I hadn't been hit, or at least I thought I hadn't, but I thought Steve had been hit. And after he'd gone, I looked across and there was red everywhere, and I thought instantly it was blood. But in fact, it was all the red gel coat off the top of the boat.
Myself, I was already down, well down, and as you can see by the angle of the helmet being down so far, that as everything was going on, it was better to stay down, and hopefully that it would go over the top of you, which thankfully it did.
And what went through your mind?
Well, almost a skeg and a propeller.
The skeg on Alan Butters' engine bore witness to the force of the impact and confirmed how lucky Barsh and Kent had been. Alan Butters described the incident as he saw it.
Nick and I were neck and neck on the last turn. We came in, both of us flat out. He half hooked it, and we came into the side of him. It could have been worse. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. And at the end of a really grueling race and a hard battle, fortunately, we came out winners.
Did you actually know that your boat had gone over the top of his?
No, I didn't. Basically, it happened in a split second. As soon as we hit, it was all over, and that was it. Nick had stopped. We briefly stopped. He seemed to be all right, so off we went again. I actually tried to avoid him, but unfortunately, he was so close to me. I mean, it was really feet. By the time my reactions had seen him stop, we were really into him by then. He was no more than 3 or 4 feet from me when it actually happened.
Well, as Alan Butters said, it could have been so much worse, and thankfully, no one was hurt, although it was certainly too close for comfort. We leave you with the results of the 7th round of the championship here in the Cornwall Coliseum, with a reminder that you can see the concluding rounds here, exclusively on Watersports World. Milford Haven on Pembrokeshire's western extremities played host to the final round of the National Offshore Circuit Powerboat Championships. It was the end of the 1992 trail for the 20 competing crews who had battled through a season of 13 races across the UK. Although 1 or 2 venues had provided flattish conditions, generally the sea had not been kind in one of the roughest years most could remember. One man who came relatively unscathed through the traumas was Nick Barsh, 5 times national champion. He was bidding for a 6 and only had to cross the start line to place himself firmly in the record books. I wondered if that would affect his attitude towards victory in the final heat as he made his final preparations. Any predictions?
Not really. I mean, it's going to be... I know there'll be a big battle between Bob and Ian, because they're actually fighting for 2nd place. So we don't really want to get in the way if possible, but out front would be very nice. If we've got to be behind, we'll be behind. But I think Ian will have been away doing some work on his boat since there's so much riding on this race. I don't believe he's stood still since the last race. So if he's gained anything since then, he'll be going very fast.
Behind Barsh in the championship, as he has been in the last 3 years, was Bob Baker. Little chance of winning, and now with problems holding on to 2nd.
It's complicated on the point system, but yes, to put it simply, we need to beat Ian. If we were down the field, he could just beat me and I could still win the championship. But that's all down to the numbers of the points.
And he's a very quick man normally off the start. He tends to go at the race with all the power on. Are you going to try and stay with him?
I hope to be showing him the way around, Peter.
In 3rd position, Ian Blacker in his first year had impressed many and still had designs on runner-up.
We need a minimum of 2 seconds today, providing Bob Baker doesn't beat us, and we'll come 2nd overall.
And you've had these 2 victories over the champion since we last spoke, and that must have given you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I feel I've got the boat running as well as it has been now, and we've new engine on the back, so we had a few problems in the middle of the season, and hopefully we've sorted all them out now.
The final round of the OCR calendar. Calm waters by comparison with the previous 12, but nevertheless a tricky little course set amongst the moorings of the towering oil tankers. Most of the important championship issues were settled as Britain's top 20 offshore circuit racing drivers got involved in the normal spray and melee of the start. And once again, it was Bob Baker and Dixon Scientific who led when the boats appeared at the end of lap 1. Barsh and Butters in close attendance.